What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It is time to release my wide receiver rankings, and of course, these are my rankings as of late July, and a lot of things are going to change in camp and during the preseason, so make sure you check out our most up-to-date rankings and projections on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But I'm going to walk through my rankings as of right now, and before we start things off with the stat of the day, I want to remind you guys about the new mini-series we're starting on the channel involving you guys. In the comment section of yesterday's and today's video, I want you guys to say your favorite draft picks and why. If you have a few of them, then try and limit it to your top 3, and obviously this is taking ADP into account. But ideally, I want you guys to write who you want to get on your team more than any other player this season, and I'll be using those responses in Friday's video. All right, let's start things off with the stat of the day. And yesterday's stat was among all players with at least 5 targets inside the 10-yard line who caught all of their targets. The answer was Christian McCaffrey, and Mark K was the first one to get that one right. Today's stat, among quarterbacks with at least 200 dropbacks last season, who had the highest adjusted completion percentage when under pressure. Okay, let's hop into the rankings. At number 1, we have Devonta Adams, and I really don't want to go too in-depth into breaking down the top 6 because they're all elite. So when I talk about these top 6 wide receivers, you're really just taking whoever you personally feel is going to have a monster season. All of them have just unbelievably high ceilings, and it's just who do you think is going to have the best one, because they're all going to be amazing. I have Adams first because I love his insane touchdown floor. I always say that receiving touchdowns are far more random than we want to admit, but he led the league in targets and percent of team targets inside the 20 last season. In fact, he's been top 3 in targets inside the 20-yard line for each of the past 3 seasons. He's going to be used a ton in the red zone. He's going to score a ton of touchdowns. I just think he's an extremely safe pick, so I have him first. But another person you could consider first is DeAndre Hopkins. He was actually fairly unlucky last season. He converted just 4 of his 15 targets inside the 10-yard line into touchdowns. He's been over 125 total targets in 5 consecutive seasons, including 4 in a row over 150. He's also missed just 1 game in his career. He's also part of what should be a top 10 offense in terms of points scored and total pace. I have nothing bad to say about Hopkins or Adams, so take whichever one you feel better about. I have it Adams Hopkins, but it's honestly, you're splitting hairs at that point. I have Odell number 3, and he's the top end wide receiver I'm most likely to end up with. He's going in the late first, early second round range, which is why I love having a late first round pick this season. The ability to pair Odell with an elite running back, or to go with Odell and then one of Julio or Michael Thomas, is just an unreal start to your draft. People are far too concerned with his injury issues. These are freak injuries, and they could have happened to anyone, and none of them elevate his risk going forward. He's moved from one of the worst quarterbacks in the league to one that's already elite in Baker Mayfield. This offense is going to score a ton of points, and he's going to be at the center of all of that. We're always looking for wide receivers early in drafts that can put themselves apart from the crowd. There are a lot of receivers each season. They can end up around, 1,100 to 1,300 yards, close to 10 touchdowns in that 8 to 12 range. When taking a wide receiver early, you want someone who can get you into that next tier. And honestly, I'm not exaggerating when I say Odell has 2,000 yard upside this season. That might make you laugh, but as a rookie, he was on pace for 1,750 yards. He just started 4 games late due to a hamstring injury. The Browns have a lot of talent, but it's really just Landry, Njoku, and a little bit to the running backs taking targets away from Odell. I'm very excited to watch the Browns this season, and as long as he doesn't miss more than a game or 2 due to injury, he's going to finish as a top 3 wide receiver with record-shattering upside. So I absolutely love getting Odell. Tyreek Hill, I have at 4, and no matter what you think of the guy, he has had back-to-back wide receiver 1 finishes, including the top overall wide receiver last season. He's a top receiving option on one of, if not the best offense in the league. And he also adds points through the ground with end arounds and maybe punt returns. I have him at 4, despite coming in with my top overall projection, which again, you can see at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, but I have him at 4 because he carries more risk than the other top 3. With the top 3, I know they're going to be elite and they carry just as much upside, but they don't have nearly as high of a chance of being just like suspended in the middle of the season. He also has this what looks like a quad bruise. It doesn't look bad. It doesn't look like he's gonna miss real leave anytime at all. So I'm not concerned at all. I'm not changing my rankings at all because of the injury unless something crazy comes out. But the fact is I'm unlikely to draft him because I prefer targeting the elite running backs early in drafts, and then I target those 3 wide receivers ahead of him, and by that point he's taken. So I completely understand if you want to take him in that early second round range. It's just not for me. I'm targeting running backs in the top 3 ahead of him. Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas is a wide receiver that I would want to pair with Odell if I'm starting off with 2 wide receivers. Maybe I'm thinking about going RB0, but you don't have to go RB0. I mean, if you start off with Odell and Michael Thomas, I mean, hey, you want to take running backs and tight ends with your next like 6 picks, you can go for it because you can count on both of them to produce elite numbers. He has more receptions over his first 3 seasons than any other player in the history of the NFL, and he's first by 33 receptions. He also has the 3rd most fantasy points ever over that stretch, just behind Randy Moss and Odell. Over the first 3 seasons, he has averaged 107 receptions for 1262 and 7.67 touchdowns a season, including 125 for 1,409 last season, which was the 4th highest approximate value of any wide receiver ever. He's also been a model of health. He's missed just 1 game in his career, finishing as the wide receiver 7, 6, and 6 over the last 3 seasons. I think he finishes in the top 3 this year because honestly, he was unlucky last season. He had 8 more receptions inside the 20-yard line than any other wide receiver and 5 more receptions inside the 10-yard line than any other wide receiver. Yet, he only scored 9 touchdowns. He's not going to get single-digit touchdowns again if he has another 24 receptions inside the 20-yard line. The only risk with him, is the contract if they don't get that done. But I would be shocked if they don't make him the highest paid wide receiver in the league. So I am still drafting him with confidence. Julio Jones clocks in at wide receiver 6, and Julio has been over 1,400 receiving yards in each of the past 5 seasons. He's also averaged 6.2 receiving touchdowns over that stretch, which isn't elite, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Since 2014, he's been the wide receiver 8, 2, 6, 4, and 5, and new offensive coordinator Dirk Cutter loves pushing the ball downfield, which is exactly where Julio thrives. He scored 8 touchdowns last season and was far more involved in the red zone than Calvin Ridley was, so don't look at Calvin Ridley's 10 touchdowns and be like, well, there it is, that's what they do, they feed Ridley in the red zone. No, they used Julio far more in the red zone. And Ridley was extremely lucky to get as many as he did. Ridley will see regression on a per-play basis. Julio, like Michael Thomas, is one of the wide receivers I'd be looking to pair with Odell if you're going RB0 in that late first round. At 7, we have Juju SmithSchuster, and Juju has the 4th most receptions all time through wide receivers' first 2 seasons, and that was with Antonio Brown there. Juju had 166 targets last season, and that's with Brown getting 168. Well, those are gone. So don't listen to people who tell you he's going to be worse now that he's number 1. He will very likely see regression on a per target basis. The thing is, his target share is so unbelievably secure. Like 180, 190 targets is well within his range of outcomes. Look at how many targets are just gone from that offense, and they're more likely to be trailing in games now that their offense is worse. He would have to get extremely unlucky in the touchdown department to not finish as a mid-wide receiver 1 with the amount of total volume he's set to receive. He already finished with the 2nd most targets inside the 20-yard line and the 10-yard line last season, and now Antonio Brown is gone. Juju is a phenomenal pick in the 2nd round. Mike Evans is next at 8, and Evans posted 68 for 15, 24, and 8 last season on just 138 targets. The yards per target were well above his career average, so they are going to come down this season. But with Humphries and Jackson gone, we can expect him to see more overall targets. I prefer Godwin at his ADP since he was actually used more in the red zone and has more to gain from these departed targets. But Evans still has huge upside and an incredibly high floor. He's never been below 1,000 receiving yards, and he's been able to stay healthy through his entire career. So I still do like Mike Evans, but if you were saying, hey, I don't want both of them, which one would I target more? It's Godwin. Antonio Brown comes in at wide receiver 9, and Brown makes the move from Big Ben to Derek Carr, and that should not be understated. We should be concerned for Brown, because quarterback matters. It's difficult to produce as a wide receiver when your quarterback is bad, and Brown is likely to see fewer overall targets. Those targets will likely be less efficient, and there will be fewer scoring opportunities. If you thought there was drama in Pittsburgh, just wait until Oakland starts losing games. This is not a player that you just can't draft, okay? But I'd want all of the top-end running backs ahead of him and the wide receivers I have ranked ahead of him. He's much more of an early third-round pick than a mid-second-round pick, and I can guarantee you when your home leagues start up, he will be going in the mid-second round, and therefore I'd say I won't have any of him. Amari Cooper comes in at 10, and Dak Prescott is by no means an elite quarterback, but he's a big upgrade from Derek Carr. In the 9 games after being traded last season, Cooper averaged 6 for 80 and 0.67 touchdowns a game, showing unbelievably high upside with 2 games over 180 receiving yards and multiple scores. He did this after being traded in the middle of the season. Receivers usually struggle when they change teams in the offseason. So the fact that he was able to produce right away is incredible. After an entire summer to train with the team, I expect Cooper to have some monster games this season, and you can usually get him at the beginning of the 3rd round. And the ability to pair 2 elite skill position players with Cooper is honestly just unfair. There will absolutely be weeks where he wins your matchup on his own, and I expect fewer dud weeks now that he's on a more stable offense. So especially if Zeke were to hold out into the season, you should be targeting Amari Cooper if he is ever available in that early 3rd round range. Keenan Allen comes in at wide receiver 11, and Allen has averaged 100 receptions, 1,300 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. With the Gordon half-season holdout looming, they might need to lean on the passing game a little bit more than usual. And since 2015, he's only played in 3 games without Gordon active. He's averaged 1.3 more receptions, 0.29 more receiving touchdowns, 16 more receiving yards, and 4.4 more fantasy points. Obviously, this is too small of a sample to really use for anything, but it's worth noting because the offense didn't just fall apart when Melvin Gordon was inactive. Allen was still able to be a productive wide receiver. The one concern would be everyone's healthy. Henry's back. Williams in his 3rd season. Remember, Williams wasn't healthy when Henry was. And the backup running backs are good pass catchers. So he's still going to be elite, but we haven't seen the offense with everyone active. Why this is concerning is because the touchdown upside is capped. I'm not saying he can't get 7, 8 touchdowns, but it's much more unlikely that he puts together like a 12 or 13 touchdown season, which is what he would kind of need to catapult him into that initial tier of wide receiver. So he's still good. He's still someone you want to target in that early 3rd round range, but don't think that he has the exact same upside of, that top 6, because he doesn't. T.Y. Hilton rounds out the wide receiver 1s, and I want to share what happened with T.Y. Hilton last season. So he pulls his hamstring in week 4, which forces him to miss week 5, week 6. Then he plays on a limited snap count in week 7, and then is basically a decoy in week 8 before their week 9 bye. Comes back from the bye. He's finally healthy. Remember, he was limited. He was a decoy. He's got the bye. He's good to go. He's over the hamstring. From week 10 on, he posted 917 receiving yards. And if we take his stat line in those weeks and extrapolate it over a full season, it's 100 receptions, 1,834 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Juju had the 2nd most receiving yards over that stretch, and he had 163 less. Nick Sirianni and Frank Reich have done an amazing job with this offense, and the return of Doyle, plus the additions of Campbell and Funchess, mean that teams aren't going to be able to double T.Y. Hilton. He's going to have some mediocre weeks, but he's also going to win you weeks. He's very similar to Amari Cooper. He has suffered a decent amount of injuries in his career, but honestly, he's been able to play through them. He's missed just 4 games in his last 5 seasons. Assuming that Andrew Luck's calf is fine to start the season, and we really just don't know enough to say that it won't be at this point, but assuming it's fine, this offense is going to be unreal. So I want the top receiving option in this elite passing game. So I'd be very excited if you ever got him in the early third round as well. Vaughn Diggs starts off the wide receiver 2s, and he was able to grab 102 receptions last year, which was his first season, over 100 receptions. And he can be a frustrating player to own because when he's fully healthy, he's one of the best route runners in the league. He has elite numbers. And when you pair him with Cousins, who I don't think is elite, but he's well above average, he's got a ton of upside because this is a very consolidated target share. I mean, we know exactly where the targets are going when everyone's healthy. So what it comes down to with Diggs is, are you willing to take the gamble? Are you willing to gamble that he's going to stay healthy for the entire season? Because he's suffered groin injuries, knee strains, hip strains, bruised ribs. He struggled. He struggled to stay healthy throughout his career. If he does, though, he's going to be a wide receiver 1. So that's a gamble. It's on you. Do you think he's going to stay healthy? If you don't, then maybe you draft my wide receiver 14 and Adam Thielen. And for Thielen, it was kind of nuts. There's the tale of two seasons. Starts off 8 consecutive games over 100 yards with an average stat line of 9.25 for 116 and 0.75 touchdowns. Nuts, right? Final 8 games. Just once did he go over 100 receiving yards, averaging a stat line of 4.9 for 56 and 0.4. He was the top scoring wide receiver by 37 points over the first 8 games, but was the wide receiver 26 over the second half, ranking behind Zay Jones, Mohamed Sanu, and Adam Humphries. The question for him isn't injuries. It's which version do you think you're going to get? Are you going to get early season Thielen or late season Thielen? It's more than likely going to be something in the middle. My projections love him. He has just under 100 receptions, under 1,400 yards, and a little bit over 7 touchdowns. And if he can put it together a season like that, then he's going to be well worth his ADP in that late second round. But ultimately, you need to decide. You need to decide if the beginning of the season was a fluke or if the late part of the season was a fluke. And whatever you come to, that's going to tell you if you should be drafting him at his ADP. Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 15. And if you want safety, Cooks is your guy. He's posted 4 consecutive 1,100-yard seasons playing with 3 different quarterbacks. In fact, there have been just 5 players with at least 5,000 receiving yards and 30 or more touchdowns before their age 26 seasons. Their names are Randy Moss, Larry Fitz, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Evans, and Brandon Cooks. He's an elite wide receiver with an elite opportunity share on an elite offense. I know he's been up and down throughout his career, but this is the first season since 2016 where he enters camp on the same team that he finished with on the prior season. As long as he stays healthy, which he's done for 4 consecutive seasons, he's going to be around 80 to 90 receptions, around in that like 1,100 to 1,300 receiving yard range, and 6 to 8 touchdowns, with massive upside in any of those categories if he hits on some big plays. Getting Cooks as your wide receiver 1 after going running back heavy is honestly an option. Like if you want to just hammer out 3 running backs you just love in the first 3 rounds, and you can start with Brandon Cooks, that is massive upside to the beginning of your draft. Kenny Golladay comes in at wide receiver 16, and we were all over Golladay last season before his breakout, and I love him again this season. Of course, his ADP is much higher after posting 70 for a little over 1,005 touchdowns last season. And a lot of people have brought up concerns that Marvin Jones was the deep threat. He was the red zone threat when he was healthy last season, and so Galladay's numbers are actually going to drop. And while it's not untrue that they use Marvin Jones in the red zone as a deep threat, it's not like Golladay can't take another step forward in his 3rd season. I mean, he only caught 5 of his 15 targets inside the 20-yard line last season. I mean, bump that up to 8 or 9, and he finishes as a high-end wide receiver 2. The main concern with Golladay isn't Jones, though. It's the total volume of the offense. You know, the Lions want to run the football a ton, so it's possible that the overall volume sees a decrease. But if they decide to air it out, then he's got monster upside. So I do have him above ECR and ADP, and I do think that you should be targeting him in your drafts. One of my favorite picks in this range, though, is Chris Godwin. You guys all know that I loved Chris Godwin the moment that he was drafted, and this is an opportunity we have been waiting for. It is finally here, guys. He's finally the full-time starter with Mike Evans and OJ Howard. This team has no real ground game unless they trade for someone, and Bruce Arians loves to air the football out. They also have a fairly mediocre defense, so they're going to be amongst the league leaders in pass attempts yet again this season. Humphries and Jackson free up 179 targets, and Godwin was already 4th in targets inside the 10-yard line, despite ranking 47th in total targets. Arians has also talked about using Godwin as the slot receiver, which is a role where Fitz produced 3 consecutive 105 reception seasons under Arians. Very few receivers share the same upside as Chris Godwin in this range, and he's someone you should absolutely be targeting in drafts. At 18, we had AJ Green, but then news came out that after having the surgery, it looks like his recovery is going to take longer than they initially thought. He's likely to miss regular season games, and that, quote, hopefully he'll be ready to go at the beginning half of the season. There's no way we can keep our ranking if that's the news coming out of the surgery. We had AJ Green ranked well below ECR and ADP for a reason. He's extremely risky, and this only adds to that risk. I cannot justify drafting AJ Green until the back half of drafts, and by that point, he'll be taken. Like, somebody is going to take AJ Green before we have him ranked. I've moved him well outside the top 25, but I don't have time to remake the rest of this video to adjust all the players forward one. So everyone that I'm going to talk about after this, just move him up one, and then the new 25 is Christian Kirk. Julian Edelman is the wide receiver 19, and Edelman is recovering from a broken thumb at the moment. The good news for him is that apparently Maurice Harris has been the best wide receiver in camp. So obviously, Edelman's still going to be the focal point of the New England passing attack. And his splits without Gronk since 2013 are mouthwatering. I mean, he's averaged 2.5 more targets, 1.25 more receptions, 15 more receiving yards without Gronk in the lineup. And if you take those stats that he has without Gronk over a full season, it's 117 receptions for a little under 1,300 yards and 5 touchdowns. That stat line would have finished 10th last season. Also, the dude's safe. Since 2015, he has just 3 total games with less than 6 targets. What are stat lines in those games? 4 for 84 and a touchdown, 4 for 53, 4 for 120, and a touchdown. The biggest risk with Edelman is his health. He's really struggled to stay healthy over his career, and he's got one of the highest projections for games missed due to injury this season. Fortunately, that's the only risk he carries, and he's going to produce in every single game that he can get onto the field. The public kind of knows this. They know how good he's been, so it's not like he's a discount or anything. But I have him ranked right at his ADP, so I still do think he is a good pick. 20. Wide receiver 20, we've got Robert Woods, and Woods is a solid wide receiver too. I wouldn't be pumped if he was my top wide receiver. I think he's more built to be a wide receiver too. But if it meant that maybe I took an elite wide receiver first, then went running back heavy, and then got Robert Woods, I mean, I'm very comfortable with that start to my draft. Kupp's return does not hurt him. He's actually performed better with Kupp in the lineup. And Cooks is the more talented wide receiver and carries more weekly upside, which does matter to me. But if you miss out on Cooks, then grabbing Woods to get a piece of the Rams offense makes sense. You always want to have a piece of the best offenses in the league. So getting one that's extremely reliable is smart. At 21, we've got DJ Moore. And you guys know I love the Panthers offense this season. People are overreacting to Newton's surgery, just like they overreacted to Luck's last season. And they have a very consolidated target share. You guys hear me say that a lot, but I want to target receivers on teams that have a consolidated target share. Moore showed last season that he's more than capable of producing as the team's number one. And if I had to choose one, it's Curtis Samuel. I do prefer Curtis Samuel at his ADP because it's a complete and utter joke, but I'm targeting the both of them because I can't be guaranteed I'm going to get Curtis Samuel late in the draft. So I absolutely love both of those wide receivers. Alshon Jeffery comes in at 22, and I expect the Eagles to be just an incredible offense this season. Wentz is finally healthy. They have a top 3 offensive line, 2 great receiving tight ends, a proven deep threat in Jackson, a reliable one in Alshon. The only concerns is what I just listed. There are a ton of weapons, and there are more behind Alshon. I mean, Aguilar's a solid wide receiver, and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside's a good receiver as well. It's entirely possible that they spread this production around to where they're scoring a ton of points, and they're getting a ton of yards, but it's going to so many people that maybe Alshon doesn't break out. But I do think for where he's going, he's a good pick, just not like an absolute steal because it's not like he's going to see 160 targets this season. He is still capped for his total targets. At 23, we have Calvin Ridley, and like I said, Ridley is obviously going to see regression this season. He scored a boatload of touchdowns despite being used very little in the red zone. The thing is, he's going to make up for it by increased usage. You know, he played every game this season, but he was in on just 62% of their offensive snaps. Plus, the move back to Dirk Cutter will improve the passing offense, not the rushing offense, but it'll improve the passing offense. And they added 2 offensive linemen, which will help keep Matt Ryan upright. The one problem right now is his hamstring injury. These things tend to linger into the season. So if he's missing a lot of time, then we need to bump him down in the rankings. But if he's able to return, this week or next week into practice and be a full go, then I'm cool still drafting him here. But we're just going to have to wait and see how severe the hamstring pull is. Jarvis Landry at 24. And my projection on Landry isn't crazy high. I think his upside is capped. And I'm not sure I've taken him a single mock draft. But that isn't to say you can't draft him. Because he's on an elite offense. And like I said, get players on elite offenses. The issue with him is that he's going to need to get a little bit lucky in the touchdown department to pay off. They're going to have Chubb score a ton of touchdowns. Odell's going to score a ton of touchdowns. Njoku's going to get his. So Landry will probably be more in that 5 to 7 range, which isn't bad. But when you also think he's going to be more at 70 to 80 receptions, and he's going to be more around the lower end of 1,000 receiving yards, it's just he's going to have to get pretty lucky to pay off. And I don't love spending mid-round picks on guys who need to get lucky to pay off. At 25, we've got Tyler Lockett, and I'm very interested to see how they end up using Lockett this season. I know they want to run the football a ton, and I do think they're going to use DK Metcalf more than people think, but there really aren't that many pass catchers on this offense. So he has an opportunity to just dominate their total target share. He's another receiver like Ridley who was overly efficient last season, but I expect to see more volume, so it should matter. In case you don't believe me, Lockett did have 9 touchdowns on 137 career receptions entering last season. Then he scored 10 times on 57 receptions. He also saw a crazy high 13.8 yards per target last season, despite seeing 9.6, 9, and 7.8 over his career. Again, I think he's going to have a great season. Just don't think that this spike in volume is going to make him a wide receiver 1, because it's much more likely that efficiency comes down. So that's the list. Those are my top 25 wide receivers. Remember, you can check out the entire list as it updates along with my projections at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And remember to write who your favorite pick is in the description of this video. But that's the end of this one. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.